Welcome back to the Denison Forum podcast. I'm Dr. Mark Turman, the Executive Director of Denison Forum, sitting down again with Dr. Jim Denison, the CEO of Denison Ministries and cultural apologist with Denison Forum. Jim, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Mark. How are you?
Doing great. Going to have a fun conversation today. We have some guests here in the studio with us. Today, joining us are Tommy Woodard and Eddie James, known to some of us as the Skit Guys. Mm-hmm. Guys, how are you today?
We're doing very well.
Good.
Our names don't have doctor in the front of them.
I know. We got to work on that.
Doctor?
Yeah,
Doctor?
Oh, there you go.
You're there now. You're there now. Honorary
A lot of
doctors
people
to
do it
each other.
just like that.
Yeah.
Won't be
awesome.
the first.
That's awesome.
So let me give you a brief orientation from my side. I've been a pastor for 34 years, 25 years in the Dallas area. Not long after I arrived in the DFW area, we were looking at ways to create some dynamics within our worship service, to tell stories, to illustrate biblical truth. And somebody said, "Hey, have you seen these things called coming out of the Skit Guys?" And one of them was a youth minister somewhere, and he apparently got over that. And anyway, we started tapping into these resources. It feels like 20 plus years ago, and it became a pretty consistent feature of our worship services, Sunday morning, other types of ministries that we were doing. Like a lot of churches, particularly 20 years ago, we played around with drama ministry of our own. We thought we could be you guys, and had some traction with that for a while, and have continued to use your resources on a consistent basis. I would imagine that's true of a number of churches and believers and pastors that will hear this podcast. I know those guys. I've seen their stuff. I've used their clip and that type of thing. A lot of it has been, at least my familiarity with, short films that you use in some kind of a ministry worship context that illustrates a truth or brings an element of biblical truth into focus for people, would be the way I describe it. That's my take on it. How would you explain yourselves? How would you describe yourselves? Where did you start when it came to creating this ministry?
That was really good.
Yeah.
Wow.
I never thought about it.
I know.
He makes us sound good.
It was all nugget size,
know,
too.
right.
It was really beautiful.
Impressive.
We started out, my buddy, Tommy, invited me to church my senior year in high school, 1987, September 17th, 1987. He invited me to church, and that changed everything for me. And then we had a youth minister that basically in the 80s, because we grew up in the 80s. And
way back in the 80s.
Way back in the 80s.
Dinosaurs rubbing the earth.
Right, the whole
planets
bit. Yeah,
cooling.
yes.
That's it.
Polyester. Yeah.
And when I first became a believer, our youth minister basically said, "Hey, I want you to do skits every Wednesday night." And that really was it. Like every Wednesday night, and he held our feet to the fire on, "I want you to do a skit." Now, my youth minister gave me a stack of skit books from the 80s. And most of them, because of the time, and I'm very thankful for the people that came before us, but most skits were basically, they got to Jesus very quickly. So it was, "Hey, Joe, you seem really sad at school today."
I'm very sad at school today.
"Oh, you need Jesus."
Thank you.
That was a skit.
That was it.
That was a skit.
Yeah,
and then there was scripture backed up, because you always had to have script. You could not talk without backing up scripture within a skit in the 80s. But I remember as a new believer going, I don't talk like, oh no, I'm in trouble. I don't talk like this. So he and I started stealing stuff from Saturday Night Live and trying to make a Christian.
That's
Can we
really
say that?
tough.
Can we say that on our podcast? Talk about Saturday Night Live?
Yeah, it's tough.
It was very hard to do. It was very hard to do.
Bit of a bridge there.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a bridge, but that's really like, and then before we knew it, our youth pastor was basically, if he had a winter retreat or, "Hey, I'm going over to speak," he would bring us with it. He would bring us along. And that's really how we started learning things of going, "Okay, what are you talking about?" Okay. And we'd open up the Word of God and we'd, okay, we can do a skit like this. And it really was kind of this improvisational, throw it out there, see if it happens type thing. And we both were youth pastors. And along the way, though, throughout the 90s, there were still friends and buddies that would go, "Hey, we're doing a camp. You want to come do skits?" And we would say yes. And it kind of grew from there. And then into the early 2000s, where churches were starting to use videos. And Tommy, you went with a college graduate that was doing film.
Yeah. We had a guy at my church that came along to be our media guy. I think that was his official title.
Probably the first one of those in church life, right?
You're like, we got a media guy. And at some point he said, "We should put what you guys do, on film or videotape it." And we're like, okay. And he did it, and it worked. And all of a sudden, churches went through this short period where they would use movie clips,
Right.
as an
Sure.
illustration.
Yes.
Right?
I've done that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then they moved to, somebody's making clips for sermons. And that's what we started doing. And so in that process, Brian, he's the guy who came to my church, he became the guy to do all of our little short movies. And so for the past 20 some odd years, we've made, I don't know how many short 3.5 minute films. The idea is don't give away the sermon. We know, the pastor's worked hard. He doesn't need you in 3 minutes to do what's going to take him 45. All right.
We would talk about when I was planning worship in my church. We talk about how do we create tension? How do we raise a question that intrigues them but doesn't bring the whole load? That's the pastor's job, if you will.
Yes, that's exactly right. So our goal has always been to walk alongside the church and to help pastors, and ourselves. We, people look at us and like, oh, you guys are crazy. We're pastors more than pranksters. Yeah. Our heart is to share with people, but we just do it through humor.
Right.
That's terrific. Could I go back to something real fast?
Yes.
Saturday Night Live.
Yes.
I think that's beyond cool.
Yeah.
Now, we can talk about this down the way and unpack it as you wish.
We're probably going to get emails by that
might get
one
that.
statement right
Exactly.
there, okay?
Lift that one thing out, just stick it out there, Yeah. What could go wrong?
I can
right?
see that
What
on the
could go
Dallas
wrong?
billboard soon. Saturday Night Live is
beyond-
cool.
beyond-
Denison,
Yes.
for him. I can
And
see
I'm
that
sure they're
coming.
waiting on my endorsement.
Yeah.
too.
Right. Lorne
that will-
Michaels is he's so excited right
And that'll
now.
go on his resume from now on. That's right. He may be calling me to ask me to say that. But one of the things I think we get wrong in Christian culture is our unwillingness to learn from people that are really good at what they do, and being willing to try to be excellent in the space.
Yeah.
One of the real pet peeves I have is of Christian media that isn't as good as secular media in terms of production values, in terms of really learning the techniques of the trade. I was a speech major in college, did a lot of drama, a lot of theater along the way, and it was always so frustrating to see the degree to which we felt like we just couldn't even try to incorporate secular values because of the secular message.
Yes.
And I just love the fact that you guys were working with really best in the business when it comes to skits, as much as we obviously struggle with the message, but the medium. What can we learn from that? How can we move that forward? And so I just wanted to thank you for doing that and normalizing that for us. And I think that's a point on a wide variety of levels we ought to be making.
Thank you. Being invited to church and then getting thrust into, really a ministry. Like our youth minister gave us an open window, and it really was that thing. Like his mom made us Hans and Franz, muscle suits, and we, but we were
Not that we needed them.
Not that we needed them.
I'm not sure I want that image in my mind.
But we were taking church lady Hans and Franz, and we were taking things like that you would see on Saturday Night Live, but then. And we're still this way today. It's humor, heart, and him. Humor,
that's so good.
Heart, and him. We always lead it back. But we were those high school buddies, those college guys getting in this truck, just going down the street for gas money and a chicken dinner, trying to figure out, okay, how do we make a Christian audience laugh? And they didn't laugh a lot in the 80s.
No.
Yeah.
There was not a lot of laughter, so our backs sweat
You weren't
a
allowed
lot.
to in
You weren't
church.
allowed
No.
to.
Right.
Yes,
It was
exactly.
disrespectful
Yes.
to laugh in the sanctuary.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
exactly.
And we've gotten to be around a long enough to go, oh, wait, they weren't being rude or mean. You just weren't supposed to laugh. And we've got to see that too. And we really do. It's a get to, not a got to. We get to see this growth and this beauty of, we could go to a family night at a church, and I just stay astounded sometimes because I know the high schooler inside me that was like, nobody's laughing, we're bombing. But then to see a whole, auditorium filled of just, believers having a good family night, enjoying things.
And I think that's part of what kind of drew me and kept me engaged with your ministry. That there's always been this sense. Somebody asked me 6, 7, 8 years ago, why are you doing this ministry? Why are you pastoring this church? And I said, I want to connect people to the joyful, abundant, supernatural life of Christ, John 10:10, and that that's what drew me in. You talk about what you couldn't do in the 80s. Well, I kind of like you, I got invited to church when I was 17. I was completely aimless in high school, got invited by my friend to come to this church. And what I loved about this church in East Texas was pastor, one of the best known pastors in this area of the country, started almost every single sermon with a joke.
That's great.
He wanted to connect you into the experience by just simply getting you to relax, and he believed that humor was powerful to do that. And he loved telling stories and jokes and things that would make you laugh. And what it meant was it caused you to relax, and you were ready for what he was going to teach you from the Bible. And so that sense of joy was really what drew me into this church and drew me into doing ministry that way. And so much needed, particularly in a time like ours where things are so difficult, so confusing, so hard, which really kind of gives rise to what kind of prompted our conversation today. You guys are about to release a full-length feature movie coming up on May the 12th, May 13th, just a little bit from now, called Family Camp, and I want us to get into some of the story around that. But before we do, especially with Jim here, he and I talked with some of his background. Just the idea, the movie we'll talk about in a moment really focuses on faith, obviously, focuses on the importance of family, the importance of priorities, but it is also fun. It's a lot about fun, and I wonder if we could just chase out that idea of humor as an aspect and an opportunity of ministry. Jim, you talked about a book by Elton Trueblood that you're familiar with. Give us some context for that.
Yeah, you bet.
Your perspective.
Yeah, Elton Trueblood's, I think, one of the most significant Christian philosophers of our generation, and really interesting story. Quaker by background, and an interesting, brilliant thinker. I think he had a book on the humor of Christ that, when I encountered it some years ago, was really revolutionary for me. He made the point that Jesus was, as a public communicator, a person who regularly, even systematically, used humor to make his points. The reason we miss it is that the humor of his culture was so different from the humor of our culture. And so we don't realize how funny he really was. So Trueblood kind of unpacks all of that a little bit. He says that in Jesus' day, in his culture, in their rabbinic culture, exaggeration was not only how you made a point, it's called rabbinic hyperbole, but that was also how you communicated humor. So for instance, Jesus would say, "Why are you paying attention to the speck in your brother's eye when there's a log in your eye?" They would have laughed at that. The exaggeration of this, you've got a telephone pole sticking out of your eye here, and you're looking at a speck of sawdust in his eye, you know? Well, in Jesus' day, the way he would have said that would have been humor in his day to say that. He tells the story of the Pharisee and the publican. And so you've got this Pharisee that comes in and prays, you know, and Lord, I'm so grateful I'm not like this guy over here. And the publican won't even look up to heaven, you know, and just beats his breast. They'd be laughing at this story of this contrast between the absolute extremes of the culture of the day. And the point he was making is, I think, the point you're making, which is that humor is an incredible entree to the heart, to the mind, but to the heart. It's a great way of opening the door, a great way of building relationship. And if Jesus would do that, shouldn't we be doing that? That's what Trueblood was all about. Well, we needed that message then. Don't we need it now?
Oh,
in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of, I mean, we could have the rest of the conversation about all the reasons why we need to laugh today, right? But to be able to do that in the context of a Christian story, in the context of the Christian faith, is saying this really is about joy. This really is about a relationship with God who loves you, who likes you, who's crazy about you. And so I just thought that idea of humor as Jesus practiced it is, I think, a biblical mandate for what you're doing. And just wanted to thank you, therefore, for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. That's I love that picture. I think it is tragic that as the church, we have such a history of not laughing.
I agree.
You know, I mean, we are the people who carry the joy of the Lord, right? And yet we're going to be so dour and so sour, you know? I mean, and that was the thing as young guys, we're performing our hearts out. You know, here we are probably 20, 21 years old. Nobody's laughing, right? But then after you're done, they're shaking your hand going, "Man, I'll tell you what, that's so funny." You know, and you're like, "I thought you were dead." Like, I could not tell, you know?
Just corpses don't laugh.
Yeah, I know, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, and I just, you know, I remember a few years ago, Roy Fish, who we're familiar with from Southwestern Seminary, taught evangelism, how to share your faith in compelling ways.
I think it was Jesus and then Roy Fish.
Yeah, right. Handed
Kind
the
of in that
baton
order, yeah.
directly to Roy Fish.
He was the unnamed 13th apostle, I think.
And
So-
I think I remember him saying on one occasion that when you're trying to not only share your faith or even, you know, get up and teach biblically, preach a message, whatever, you have to understand that you need to come through their heart to their head.
Right.
Yep.
And if you don't do that, if you try to go the other way many times, you're just not going to get there.
Yeah.
And
Even Aristotle knew that. In his book
Yeah.
on rhetoric, he understood that. You have to speak to the heart, then to the head, and then to the will. And he thought it was in that order.
And I remember,
And we jump immediately to the will. We want you to do X.
That's so true.
When we haven't first moved your emotions to open your mind, to then have your mind move to your volition. And it's really almost a 3-stage process.
yeah, and humor being kind of one of the safest pathways
That's right.
into a person's heart, where they, like I said, that's again why my pastor would tell jokes. I think I remember, however, and when we sit around and pastors sit around, right, people who have served at church. Mostly, if they sit around and tell "quote unquote" war stories, they tell the funny things that happened. The kid that did a cannonball into the baptistry, or
People do that? Kids do that?
yes.
Oh, well, okay.
That sounds like fun.
That does.
And I know it's probably never happened to you guys that you said something that came out of your mouth that you were like, "There
Never.
that goes. I need to retrieve that word."
Oh yeah.
Can unring a bell.
And that's going to be the thing that I'm known for. At my church, we had a list of them that they kept running of Markisms that
That's great.
that they didn't want to talk about anything else that God might have done in that church. They wanted to talk about, you remember the time you said this, when you meant that, but you said this. But I also remember I used to crawl up in my parents' bed on occasion when I was a kid, and they would watch a comedian by the name of Jonathan Winters.
Oh, yeah.
He's so
Oh, yeah.
talented.
And I remember listening to Jonathan Winters unpack his craft on one occasion, and this certainly held true out of his personal life, that so much of humor emerges out of pain. It emerges out of brokenness. Has that been something that you guys have been able to pursue and work with?
I think so. If you were to CSI our lives, Tommy and I's lives, I came from a really dysfunctional home, really abusive home. I would say pain was a part of my childhood, a part of what I
Sorry.
Thank you. What I knew about I think it led me into ministry as far as wanting to shepherd people, take care of people, and to not
Kind of give what you hadn't received.
Yeah. And with that, though, you have to heal. You have to allow God to heal the stuff that is broken inside you. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I don't live in pain anymore, but I do know that pain, and when I see it, or when I sense it, or when I see someone having it, like, I definitely can relate and have empathy for it. And I think it does. I don't know what that reservoir is. I don't know where it comes from, but there is a reservoir that it does. It allows the humor. It allows the other side of the pain come forth. Because if you're going to talk about pain, you have to make them laugh. I really, for however that's worked, I don't think I'm the funniest guy or anything, but I do believe everything you just said about, like, your pastor. Humor breaks down walls for truth to enter. I mean, if you can get someone to laugh, you can get them to listen. And I think that's been the story of our friendship and we are the two guys we will leave here and we'll go get in Tommy's car and we'll laugh. We'll laugh like we did, like, when we were in high school. But, like, we were walking through the airport 2 days ago, and it was kind of one of those, out of body things where we're kind of walking and we're just cracking up laughing. And I'm going, my goodness, laughter's so good. Like, I'm sure we look like fools. I'm sure we look like idiots just laughing and cackling, people, looking, trying to get to their gate, but going, my goodness, laughter is just, it's a beautiful, and it just kind of really, it is good medicine.
And it's so attractive. I want that.
Yeah.
There's something in me that wants that, If your faith can make you laugh like that, well, I want that, I grew up in a home with no spiritual life at all. My dad had fought in World War II, came back and never went to church again. And so I grew up with no spiritual life, all my dad's questions. I got invited on a bus ministry when I was 15 years old to go to church. Man. First time I'd ever heard the gospel. And after a few weeks, I asked my Sunday school teacher, not how could I be justified and sanctified, how can I have what you have? That was literally my question.
Gosh,
what a
and out of
compliment.
that, she led me to faith in Christ. But it was the joy in these people. It was something I just had not experienced. And I think the Holy Spirit is able to use on that intuitive level just what it is to be community, what it is to have the joy of the Lord, to have the abundant life of Christ. Yeah. And it just speaks to our souls. I think there is a God-shaped emptiness in us. Our hearts are restless till they rest in Him, and in ways that we don't even know. You may never know the seeds you were planting as you're walking down that airport runway, or not the runway, I hope, but as you're trying to get that would be different.
Yeah.
That would be funny.
Yeah, that would be
That
funny.
would
in some
be
way.
funny.
See these guys out here, and all this
I
stuff.
think you just laid the foundation for their next
Their next
skit.
skit. Yeah, exactly. So, but as you're doing that, people are watching you, and you don't even know they're watching you.
Yeah.
And they might have seen your movie. They might have seen your skit. They might have seen you in church the other day, and they're seeing you be real.
Yeah.
They're seeing the faith be real in you. Alfred North Whitehead said, "Great people plant trees they'll never sit under." And I think that's
Yes.
a lot of what you're doing, you know?
That's beautiful.
And people that are seeing the authenticity of your faith in ways that are going to draw them to that faith that you just may never know about. And
It's a good
privilege.
word.
I hope so.
Thank you.
You know,
Thank
to
you.
use like
That's
that.
a great word. That's a
So
great word.
let's talk a little bit about the backstory around this movie, Family Camp. It's a pretty, some interesting things going on in the area of Christian filmmaking. We've seen the guys out of Atlanta and some others making various movies that have come out. Of course, right now in the kind of new world on the other side of a global pandemic, movies and theaters trying to get their act back together. Certainly, I don't know that I've ever met a single human being who didn't want to go see a movie, especially a good story, right? I mean, it just as much as we're great at seeing screens in our pocket or at home, it's just something about going to a theater and having a bucket of popcorn, being in a dark room with a whole bunch of total strangers and watching this screen together, right? And so obviously the movie industry is trying to regain their traction in these days. How do you guys go from what you've become known for, what you've done so much of over a couple of decades of making these short films and that type of thing that were used in, like I said, churches, ministry context, seems to me like a pretty significant leap from there to a full-blown movie that may be showing in 900 theaters in a couple of days. What's the backstory around that you want people to know?
It's a great question. We have said throughout our ministry, do what you can where you are with what you have and leave the results up to God. And so we've tried to be as best we can faithful in these things. There's always been the dream. There's always the dream to make a movie. It just seemed impossible, until you mentioned the Kendrick brothers, you have these guys come out and all of a sudden, they're making some movies that are in the theaters and people are going to see them. And so there was kind of that, well, maybe someday, And so we started acting as if. And if you saw any of our short films, what you didn't know was the set for our short films was almost identical to the set to make the movie. So we just started living as if like, one day we hope we get to do this and we want to be comfortable with it. But we still didn't know. Nobody's knocking on our door going, hey, we need a Skit Guys movie,
Right.
Nobody.
People are knocking on the door going, who are the Skit Guys?
Yeah.
So-
Skit who?
Right?
Say what?
So we are trying, we're hoping, people are coming to us, you should crowdsource it. You should, there's all these different ways to make a movie. My buddy Eddie here, one morning is praying, and he just says this, God, it's yours. We're not going to force it. We're going to try to make it happen. If you want it, it's yours. 2 hours later, the phone rings. A guy named Jason says, I was just thinking about you guys. Have you ever thought about making a movie? Wow. Yes. In fact, if you'd have called 2 hours ago.
I just gave up on the idea.
guys.
I just gave it over.
I just completely gave it up and put it in God's hands and walked away.
Nothing is happening.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jason would introduce us to a man named Bill Reeves, who would become, within the next, there's way too many details, but Bill would become the president of the company that runs K-Love, and then Bill would connect us with Sony Provident. And you just saw, the other thing we've really believed is that at just the right time, God brings just the right people you don't even know to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. Throughout this entire process, we could talk about what did we do and how did we do it and all of that. The truth of the matter is, in our hearts and in our minds, God's the one who's really made this happen. Even including in the midst of a global pandemic, there was one movie being filmed in America, and it was ours.
Wow.
And there was one other movie being filmed somewhere else in the world. And we took that very serious. We were very cautious. We didn't scoff at what was going on. No one got sick because of the situation as it was. There was a lot of cameras and production stuff that wasn't being used. Sure. So we got to use it a lot less expensive. There was just all these different things that you see going into getting it released into the theaters. It's getting released into theaters because everybody else said no. Nobody wanted to stream it. Nobody wanted to back it up. And finally, Roadside came along and said, we'll take it. Let's see what we can do, So I don't think I could tell you that there's something we did to make this happen, but it seems like God's hand was on it, and we hope so.
Yeah.
So is that to say that the script was something that you guys had been working on and kind of putting a story together so that if God ever decided to kind of open the doors, it would be there? Or how did the actual story come to be?
We had it would be reminiscent of probably Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. We had it was a movie called Rideshare, and basically this was a buddy comedy, and that was the one that seemed to get, okay, we're going to do this one, and then it cost too much money, and they were very honest, like, hey, you guys are nobody knows who you guys are. This movie, if you go page by page and you itemize this, it costs too much money. So we're so sorry. Just for example, like I grew up, we both went to Saddleback as interns in summer of '89, and I ended up staying. So I got to sit under Rick, and so I remember one of his sermons was.
Well, let me back up. Some may not know what you're talking about. So Saddleback Community Church,
Rick Warren.
Purpose-driven life,
Purpose-driven church,
yes.
All of that.
That's Saddleback.
That's Saddleback. My boss for like 8 years.
I was at First Baptist Frisco.
Same thing.
Yeah, got it.
Which, by the way, Frisco is the center of the universe now,
It
as it
wasn't
relates
then.
to the center of the
so
country.
true.
Yeah.
Frisco, just north of Dallas,
Fastest growing city in the country.
Yeah,
right now.
fastest
That's
growing
right.
city in
And
the
that's because
country.
you were there.
I was there. I
Yeah,
started
you just
it.
burgeoned it all.
I just pushed
Yeah,
the pebble down the hill.
But he gave a sermon one day just about dreams and over Abraham, and just every dream has and they're all D's, right? Because that's what pastors do.
Of course. It's so biblical.
Yes. So
Alliterate.
Yes. But there was a dream to be made. You have a decision, and then with every dream, there's delays, difficulties, and dead ends before deliverance. And I would say this movie is a beautiful picture of a dream, of a risk, of just trying, but every step of the way, dead ends, delays, difficulties. Even with that first movie, it wasn't going to be, they said no. And then you look at this dead end and you're going, well, God, okay, did we not hear you? You know, what does all this look like? And then the guy that's made all our mini movies, like over 2 days, basically went, he just put out Family Camp. I mean, it was rough, it was bare bones, but it was enough for them to go, this one will do. It takes place in one setting, the cost will be low, let's try this. And so all of us, we just came together, and just kept working on it and fleshing it out. Sony was very good because with the Kendrick Brother movies to go, hey, here's what we know from these movies. We need more of this and we need more of this. So we really did try that all the way going, we are going to be the first faith-based, family-friendly comedy in this genre. And even if you take off the name faith-based, family-friendly comedy, there are none. Mm-hmm. There are cartoons and there's superhero movies, but how we grew up with Tim Conway and Don Knotts, the Apple Dumpling Gang, or anything else to where your family could take you to these movies and their back wasn't tight, they weren't afraid of what was going to be said. There aren't any of those movies anymore. We get on our apps going, is it okay? Can I lower my standards as a believer to be entertained? Mm-hmm. Can I lower my standards and, let me get on this app and make sure this movie is halfway okay for my kids to see. You don't have to worry about any of that with this one because, we got the opportunity and it's a get to. Mm-hmm. First faith-based, family-friendly comedy, and we hope audiences really like it. We hope it's a chance for them to get out there and take their families.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing that.
Oh,
Praise
yeah.
God
Absolutely.
that you're doing that. Writing an article right now that we're going to put up on our website in the next day or so about the degree to which there's so much in the culture trying to normalize what you think of as unbiblical morality. And it's not just Pride Month. It's not just the things that are overt like that. It's me watching a TV show last night in which two gay characters, are intricate to the story and two of the most sympathetic characters in the entire plot, in the entire story. If a couple doesn't have sex on their first date, we're surprised,
Right.
We've gotten so normalized, so desensitized that I've got grandchildren who, by the way, are perfect.
No question about it.
Inherited original sin to skip them. Don't know how that happened, but I'm so grateful, But I cringe when they're in the house and commercials are on.
Yes.
With things that are inside the
Yes.
space. And not just even the stuff we're all familiar with, but just how, once you start thinking how pervasive it is.
Yes.
So you get on the app and you ask, okay, is this at least something I can live with? Is is at least 2 out of 5 when it comes to this character, that character, whatever, this category as opposed to others. So thank you as a father and a grandfather for giving us for the first time an option where our kids can be entertained in a holistic way that even more than that has an eternal message. But boy, I'm thinking you're just planting seeds in what you're doing right now in hearts and minds of lives that you're not going to meet the short of eternity. And that's just a terrific calling, isn't it, to get
Thank
to do
you.
that?
It's-
God bless
but
you.
what
Thank you
faith
for
it took
that.
for you to step out to do it, though. You know?
Thanks.
One of the film clips we used to play all the time, back when we were all using film clips and sermons, you know,
Yeah.
was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
I love that.
Oh, yeah.
And
Love
the
that
step off
clip.
the
The
deal.
faith.
Yes.
Yes.
And
So
the
good.
bridge is there, but he can't see it till he steps on
Yep.
it.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
That's what you did. You knew it was
thank you.
there, but you don't really know it's there
Yeah.
till you
Yeah.
step on it. You know?
Well, listen, it's scary.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like
Have to be.
we've made the movie and everything, and it's still just really scary.
Sure.
And thank you for saying that because we've just been doing it. I haven't thought of it as steps of faith, and that is that blesses my heart to think about it
a
from that
good word.
perspective. Thank you.
Well, it positions you to receive God's best, you know? Faith doesn't earn his favor, it positions us to receive his favor.
Oh, so good.
And that's what you've done. You put yourselves in position to be used by God in ways that you won't be able to measure the full success of this side of eternity. And I'm moved that you've done this and grateful and so encouraged.
Thank you.
You know, that you didn't have to do this. You didn't have to go do this except for the call of God on your lives, you know? And for you to take what the world would consider to be a real risk, but for you, it was a risk not to be obedient, you know? And I'm glad you knew that. More of us need to know that, I think.
Thank
Wow.
you. You know,
Yeah.
Eddie talked about us lowering our standards. One of our great goals is to make films that are so funny,
So excellent.
so
Yes.
excellent,
Yes.
that somebody who's not a believer
Yes.
will go, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care that it's a Christian movie.
Yes.
It's
May
great.
your
I'm going to
tribe
go see
increase.
it. You know,
Amen.
that's the goal, and it's a great
Yeah.
challenge. You know, but we've had a TV show for a while. And we'll get some feedback, and it'll be, I can't get my dad to go to church, but he'll watch your show.
so
you
great.
know, and we consider that a great compliment.
Absolutely.
You know,
Well, that's how we used to do it. I mean, if you've been to the great cathedrals, you know, in Europe, if you've seen these churches built over generations of time, there was a day when worship required excellence. When the idea was, we're going to come in, you may be in a small town in this village here, and you may have a small hut, but you come to this church and you're drawn vertically to God, and the beauty of the artwork around you, the beauty of the architecture, all of that. I love leading study tours to Israel. I've done that 35 times over the years. And Holy Sepulchre is my favorite church on the planet. The beauty of it, the beauty of the symbolism inside it, the beauty of the artistic expression and the sacrifice of this. Plus, you've got people coming from literally all over the world
Wow.
to worship God there. It's Revelation 7, people of every tribe, language, people, and tongue. And so here I am as a Baptist minister whose favorite church is Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And so much of it is because of the excellence, the quality of the artistic expression to the glory of God. So we used to do that.
Yeah.
Used to be that's what Christians were known for, you know? And boy, to the degree that we can come back to that place and earn the right to be heard in the culture,
yes.
by doing this with that kind of excellence is exactly, I think, our future.
Come on.
Wow.
Jim, where do you think we got off of some of that to where, you know, I've heard people talk about it even in the form of architecture, and you see oftentimes in our world today much more simplistic
Yes.
things. I remember being at Saddleback on one occasion and Rick Warren saying, "Nobody comes here for the building." And, you know, it's
So
basically
true.
a square box with a patio.
And a tent before that.
And a tent before
Yeah,
that.
before a tent, yeah.
And certainly there are extremes where but I have somebody in my life that I see on a regular basis who is a Catholic believer, and when I asked her why that particular expression of Christian faith, she said, "I love the pageantry of it. I that's what I love about it. I connect in a faith oriented way because of the beauty of it, the color, the pageantry of it." But we've lost some of that. But faith has always been expressed in the arts.
Well, look at the temple. Look at the synagogue before that, and then look at the
Exactly.
temple and the beauty of the temple and the gold leaf covering the temple. It wasn't functional; it was aesthetic, you know.
Wow.
And it's God trying to make that point and how He describes heaven and all that. Well, there's a lot inside that, of course, as y'all would know. But a short version would be that you get to this Protestant Reformation, 16th century, Martin Luther, and it takes two branches. The one side's known as the Magisterial Reformation. This is Luther. This is Calvin. This is the reformers that are protected by the magistrates. Therefore, the Magisterial Reformation. It says, we're going to keep everything the Catholic Church is doing, which is not unbiblical. Now, we may reinterpret it. We may rebrand it. The Bible doesn't say thou shalt not sprinkle babies, for instance. So we'll continue infant baptism, but we'll repurpose that as dedicating a child to God, as opposed to washing away inherited original sin, that sort of thing. So in those kinds of traditions, which today you'd think of as Episcopal or Anglican, you're going to keep Catholic pageantry. You're going to keep some of the symbolism. You're going to keep some of the artistry. You're going to see that not as an end, but as a means, which was always in the Catholic tradition, the best tradition as well. But then you had a so-called radical Reformation, which said we're only going to keep what the Catholic Church is doing, which is biblical. Well, no place in the Bible do you baptize infants, so we stop baptizing babies and start baptizing believers by immersion and so forth. So there becomes kind of a rejection of all things Catholic, including symbolism, including what's known as icons, including the pageantry of the artistry, of the aesthetics and the architecture and all of that. And they're just kind of a baby with the bathwater, I think, kind of a reaction, a rejection of all of that. And then on a pragmatic level, it's a whole lot easier to settle a frontier if you can meet in a farmhouse. If you can put up 4 walls and a table and some kind of a trough to baptize in, and a farmer can preach, you know? Yeah. And so while you've got these magisterial Reformation type churches, the Catholic churches, waiting on a priest to come from the seminary over in Philadelphia, you got these farmers preaching in Baptist churches, you know? Yeah. And so part of it is we don't want to be Catholic, and part of it is we're being pretty practical here, and it's just simpler to do it this way, and I think that's a lot of it.
Wow. And sometimes if you haven't traveled to places like Europe and even back to Israel, that type of thing, you don't realize a lot of things that are here, it took a long time for them to get here.
Yes.
You know, we talk about mourning the burning of the Cathedral of Notre Dame.
Oh, yeah.
800 years.
Those things didn't just show up.
That's right.
In 100 years or so. It takes a lot longer to
generations
to get to some of these things, right?
Yeah. Wow.
But I want to circle back to Luther just a minute and to the Reformation. I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to go to Wittenberg, where Martin Luther did his studies and
95 Theses
and the whole 95 Theses. One of the things I learned that was completely new to me was how the arts played into the Reformation.
Absolutely.
And that if you go and study, literally go to this wonderful little village in Germany where Wittenberg, that is Wittenberg. You have this beautiful church on one end of the street. You have the monastery where Luther lived and taught on the other end of the street. It's basically about 1 mile long. On this cobblestone street, as the teacher explained to us, this is where God ignited the Reformation, on this one little mile of street. But it wasn't simply Martin Luther. There were a lot of other people involved. You had not only the technology of the Gutenberg press, which it was key to this in similar ways to a camera for making a movie or the internet today, but you also had a guy named Philip Melanchthon, who became the pen, essentially, of writing down many of the things that were being taught and said and the reforms that were being considered. But you also had this guy named Cranach, who was, first time I ever heard the term polymath was about this guy. A polymath is someone who is a genius across multiple categories. And that was this guy living in this town named Cranach. He was not only brilliant on multiple levels, he was a brilliant artist. And he interpreted many of the things that Luther was trying to teach into art. He would do wood carvings.
Wow.
And the wood carvings would tell the story of the gospel in a fresh way as Luther and Melanchthon were trying to articulate it.
And some of that in cultures that were not yet literate, or at least didn't have a lot of access to that, but you could hear the story. You could see the story. Yeah. And then Luther's hymnology, the degree to which he communicated Reformation truth through hymns like "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God,"
right.
You know? Which, by the way, I don't mean to belabor this point, the way that we do it is, I'm told by music historians, not the way it was done. There's a story out there anyway that Luther originally set that to what was a barroom tune of the day because the tune was known. Yeah. And instead of it being this ponderous, I won't sing it, "A Mighty Fortress," it was "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," was told the original tune.
Based on Psalm 46, right?
And that's right, that he built it on that. So again, using the culture of the day in order to communicate and advance a movement. And isn't that how God's always done it?
Yeah, and not to endorse things we don't mean to endorse, but Luther was very proud of his beer making ability and his beer drinking ability. Matter of fact, he used to mock his friend Philip Melanchthon because, Melanchthon couldn't hold his beer very well, and Luther could. So they often had a lot of jokes around that.
Yeah, he had his table talks, and they said he did his best work after a couple of beers.
No. That's funny.
He was asked how the Reformation started. He said, "Well, while I ate, slept, and drank beer, the Holy Spirit did it all." I'm not saying that's a formula.
Funny.
We're not
Which sounds like the basis of a Saturday Night Live skit.
I think perhaps so. Perhaps so. Back in the day.
It's funny, like I am listening to all that, and it really does harken me back to, I think about staying at home, like being a latchkey kid. Dad moved about, 45 minutes down the road, and mom went back to school. So back in those days, it really was me and my sister coming home after you have the key, you unlock the door, you lock the door, you do your homework, and you get we have food to eat, but we watch TV. Like I watch TV. I can remember, you're talking about all the arts. I grew up on TV more than I did sports because I had to stay inside. I can remember Tuesday night, 7:00, Happy Days comes on.
Sure.
And like the Fonz was it in the late 70s, early 80s.
Oh, yeah.
The Fonz got a
Richie,
library
the
card.
Fonz, yeah.
The whole country got a library card, right?
Yeah.
I can remember this one episode, and it was so real to me. But when I think about part of my faith, as weird as this sounds, talking about the arts, there was an episode called Richie Almost Dies. And basically, it must have been Sweeps Week or something because Richie Cunningham is in a motorcycle accident. The Fonz walks in. He's by Richie's, his best buddy's deathbed, and he sees Richie lying there. And I will never forget it. I'm like 7 years old, 8 years old. I'm by myself. Arthur Fonzarelli comes around, and he looks up, and he starts talking to God. And as a kid, that was one of the first times I ever saw somebody, and he's crying. And, it's acting, right? I mean, Gary Marshall wrote the thing, wrote all these sitcoms. But for me as a 7-year-old by myself with the door locked, that was so real. The Fonz is talking to God. And I will never forget it as a 7-year-old going, he's praying, he's talking to God. And really, like it was a launching pad for me to talk to God. I have journals starting in 6th grade, 5th grade, where it's my journal to God. And I hadn't been to church yet, but I think about those little steps of faith and going, I think Arthur Fonzarelli was like one of my first inductees as far as the arts.
He was your first Apostle Paul.
He really was.
Great.
Looking
Yeah.
up,
Sure.
talking to God, going, God, I don't know what this is going to do. I don't know how this is going to look. But,
Wow.
but if you can't, anyway. Just
So you're
the
here because
arts.
of Fonz and Saturday Night Live.
There you go.
There you go.
And Jesus. And
Faith
Jesus.
Kid.
And
Yeah,
Jesus.
that's
Jesus.
right.
And Jesus.
Better. And now we have Skit Guys, and now we've got a movie.
Well, yeah,
There you go.
and again, some parallels to my own story. Kind of an aimless 17-year-old. I'm working in a grocery store, end up at a guy's house, about 6 or 8 of us, 10 of us watching a movie. And it happens to be, in this case, a scary movie, which I hate scary movies.
Mm-hmm.
I do not watch scary movies. Do not do any scary movies because I will not watch them, okay? But we're actually watching a movie that some may remember called The Omen
Oh
with
my
Gregory
Oh my
Peck.
goodness.
Oh
I've
my
never
stars.
seen it.
Me neither.
Yeah, I've
It's
never
scary.
seen
Don't
it.
go. Don't
yeah,
go.
and like I said, this is where I really got convinced never to watch scary movies. But we're watching this movie, and one of my friends can tell that I'm scared by this movie. He goes, well, all of this is kind of based on stuff in the Bible. And I'm like, there's no way this is in the Bible. First time I ever saw a guy reach over, pick up a Bible off the card table or off the coffee table, walk over to me, flip back to the book of Revelation that had some reference to the movie and says, no, look what it says right here. That's what they're showing you on the movie.
Wow.
And that started, as
Isn't that
best as I
amazing?
can understand it, a pondering and a questioning and a searching. Because up until that point, I'd been raised in a devout Catholic family for 10 years, first 10 years of my life, had not had any spiritual influence in my life for 6 or 7 years until this moment.
Isn't that amazing?
And this movie starts prompting questions in my mind. And it just that's how I ended up in this room today.
That's so beautiful.
It's beautiful.
So I want to go back to something that you're talking about, the category. I want to go back to the category, faith-based, family-friendly comedy as a genre, because I want to think, in some ways, obviously, that's a natural outgrowth of who you guys have been, right? And the ministry that you've done and the ministry of bringing truth and gospel through laughter. So you can kind of easily make that connection. But do you worry in any way about the preconceptions of people who, let's go see that church film that the Skit Guys did? They're going to walk in with an expectation about other faith-based movies that they've seen. Right. Are you concerned about that at all? I'm walking into that.
No, I'll be honest with you. I'm not concerned. Our movie is different. It is unapologetically. Will everyone get exactly what they're hoping to get? No, but I believe they'll get what they need, and I think they will be entertained. So I think there may be moments in the movie that they're waiting for that moment that the non-Christian does something evil, and it doesn't happen in our movie, because non-Christian people aren't evil, so we shouldn't be making those kind of stories. But
Thank you.
so they may not get that. They may not get that thing that makes them leave going, because I'm a Christian, I'm better than the lost world,
Good.
But what we have in this movie, besides a lot of laughs, I think, is real people with real problems. The dads aren't doofuses in this movie; they're just normal dads.
But how are the granddads? That's what.
And then
the next movie,
kings.
This is what we need to be discussing, right?
Yes.
A whole movie just about how cool grandparents.
Cool grandparents are.
That's right. Yes.
So but to answer your question real directly, I'm not worried about that. Now, do I think it's possible they might not walk in the theater because they're afraid they won't get it? That's possible, but I hope they'll take the chance.
It's been very fascinating to go. We are basically doing what we've always done, even since high school. Like, we don't talk like this, but we talk like this. How can we put this out there? How can we portray this? There was even someone that commented, "This feels like an Adam Sandler movie without Adam Sandler," and there was a debate of whether that was good or bad. And,
it's good,
and so, but if you looked at the territory Adam Sandler built, and I'm not condoning the territory, but you know exactly what he's about. So to answer your question, if we could build a territory where people go, I can trust the Skit Guys. Humor heart him all day long. If they can trust us, if we could build that type of territory and people go, no, they're good. That I think over the next 10 years, that could be a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. And I wonder if it's maybe even the reintroduction of this genre. Right, because I can remember, like you said, the Apple Dumpling Gang and those types of movies, and that my parents were completely unconcerned that anything negative or destructive to they were completely safe with it.
We can go.
We're can go,
okay.
and we can go with no hesitation. This will be a great thing. But it really is a genre, even if you take the faith part off of it, is a genre that's been lost.
And it's tragic.
Most of the last 30 or 40 years.
It's so sad,
really
and
is.
as the church, we want to be about building up the family and encouraging the family. Eddie and I have been serving the church for, over 25 years. One of the things we love is we started off by just doing youth events, right? And then it became church-wide events. And so we'll go do a family night at a church. And you have everyone there we used to say age 8 to 80, and then the 6-year-olds got mad. So now we say 2 to 200.
Yeah.
But the 200-year-olds are really quiet.
They're dry bones. Dry bones.
But what we love is in the middle of performing, you're seeing the grandpa laugh. You're seeing the little kid laugh. And the great reward is after it's over and it's the glorification of the worm, and you're shaking hands and talking to people. And that dad that comes up and says, with tears in his eyes, thank you. Thanks for giving my family something to do together.
Wow.
And I think that's what we've done with this movie.
That's so great. Yeah. Such a gift. We're in a culture right now that says that's not what you want to make movies for. You either want to make it because you've got a message you want to communicate, and the message is not what we wish the message was, or because you want to reflect a culture that's all screwed up, and so for the movie wants to reflect all of that. To go to that third direction that says, I really want to communicate a message, but the message is so countercultural, it's actually enjoyable. It's actually fun. It's actually good for your family. Is, to your point, recreating the past in a way that is in such a different cultural moment. I think a lot of the past came out of a culture that celebrated that thought, well, that's what art ought to do. It ought to reflect a time that was simpler, a time where family really was seen as foundational and holistic and healthy and good. And now let's come back and almost proactively try to recreate that moment again. And we need some prophets to do that.
Wow.
We need some people to go out there and say, this is what the future should look like. Isn't it a shame that the only time you get to laugh with your family is at this movie? Isn't it a shame the only place where you feel safe with your family is here? Well, how are you going to do something about that? How are you going to use your influence to do what we're doing here on a pay it forward sort of a way? And I think it's just terrific to be that kind of stake in the ground and that first place forward,
Thank you.
for a movement, that is really ultimately what we need.
Oh, I hope so.
So just a couple more minutes before we wrap up. Anything else about this journey? I'm kind of curious about from the time of the phone call to the time the movie was finished, how much time that was. But anything else about what your ministry is about the movie specifically, that you want people to know as you head into its release?
I think I've just been, Tommy will use this verbiage about just chasing those first moments of, when we gave our lives to Jesus, and when you're like, whoa, oh my goodness, I get to live this out. I get to be about this. And you get to see those God moments. We're in our 50s, and, so we've got to.
You're really young.
Very young. Very
So
young.
young, yeah.
Very young. But I want that for others. Like, I think the little boy in me that teared up watching the Fonz talk to God, like, our movie can do that. Our movie is unapologetically set in this real estate, so to speak, for you to go, for families not to have to worry, like the Apple Dumpling Gang and those types of movies, but they're going to hear about God. It's going to point them to God. I remember being in my 20s, and CBS came out with Touched by an Angel. And I remember reading
Downey.
in the Orange County Register on a weekly basis going, the number one show, the number one show, the number one show. How is this touched by what? Like the number one show, 34 million people in the 90s were watching the show. And every episode was there some heart being turned to God and the change that happened with that. All that to say, I hope that's what we're doing. I hope people can come, even if they haven't set foot in church in a long time, even if they felt like they've lived a wicked lifestyle, they can go, all right, I'll go with you. I don't want to go with you, Uncle George, but I'm going to go. And they go, and they're kind of laughing, and they didn't really mean to laugh, but they're laughing, but they're going to hear a message of hope. Like, I hope the little kid in me gets excited for that.
Yeah.
We'll pray to that end.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Eddie talks about chasing moments. In my story, in 1987, I went on a mission trip, just graduated high school. I stepped out on a little platform in a church in Mississippi and did a monologue called A Substitute Worker for Children's Church. It's the first time I'd ever used my gifts and talents to honor God. I was going to go on a week-long mission trip, and then I was going to go, after Eddie graduated, we were going to go to New York and be on Saturday Night Live. That was the dream.
That was the dream.
I thought, if I give God a week, he's going to owe me.
Yeah. That's how it works, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
We can
what
get
was
the
in
God
my
of the
head.
universe under our thumb here.
let
You
me
be
get
Hans
this-
and Franz
Right.
like you do this week.
Let me get this out of the way.
Give it
Yeah.
That very first night of that mission trip, after it was over, this little old lady came up to me and she grabbed my hands and she said, "The Holy Spirit spoke to me tonight through what you did." And we talk about a calling, and I do believe in callings. In my own life, I go, is it a calling? I don't know. I know what it is. It's chasing. I've chased that moment ever since that moment. And the hope, and it's what Eddie and I do together, the hope is that this movie is another one of those things that people will be able to leave. And even if they can't identify it's the Holy Spirit, but that they were spoken to by someone, by something, that if they know who he is, they will pursue him even closer. And if they don't know who he is, they will seek him out. And that hopefully, like with your Sunday school teacher, that they will leave going, I want what they have,
Yeah.
Amen. That's awesome. Terrific. So that little old lady, who knows?
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that-
I'll
All
never
of this
what you
as
were
a result
saying.
of her authenticity,
I'm telling you,
her willingness
it
to be an
changed
instrument of the Holy Spirit in your life.
Changed everything. It would be 2 months later that I invited him to church,
Yeah.
and he would say yes to God, and everything would change.
And all the dominoes out of that.
Yeah.
You cannot measure the eternal significance of present faithfulness.
Ugh.
You just can't.
Say
You
that
know?
one more time.
True.
You cannot measure the eternal significance of present faithfulness.
Present
You don't
faithfulness.
know. You
That's
just
so
don't know.
good.
She had no way to know.
She
had
had
no way to
no
know.
way
She came
to
up
know.
just to say that
Yeah,
word to you.
and you
Here
write
we
all
go.
this down.
This guy's full of one-liners.
I love it.
Yeah, he's
I
full of
love
one-liners.
it. I love it.
Well, but I also
beautiful.
think Saturday Night Live's cool. So, so I don't know.
You gotta weigh all that, right?
It's a challenge in there someplace.
All right. Yeah.
This has been really great.
Yeah. Thank
Been
y'all
really
for joining
great.
us.
Oh, my
I love
goodness.
it. Humor, heart, and him.
That's what we try to
That's
do.
awesome.
The movie is Family Camp.
Yep.
Releases on May the 13th. Selected theaters on May the 12th. Some churches and organizations are renting out entire theaters.
They are. It's
as
been
an
nuts.
opportunity for not only a family but the church family.
Yeah.
Great thing to invite people to. Obviously.
If I can add, and
Sure.
we've just through this process learned how it all works, but that opening weekend is the key. Like some people say, well, I'll wait and see. But we have the opportunity as believers to send a message to the industry that we want more faith-based comedies, more faith-based movies. So if you can go that opening weekend, that's huge.
Great point.
Yeah.
It goes to the stats. It goes to how it's calculated.
Everything.
Everything that goes past that.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
we need to send that signal.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
Yeah. Thank you guys for joining us, for being a part of this conversation. I want to thank our audience for listening to us. I hope the conversation has been helpful to you. If it has, hope you'll share this podcast with others and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform. That helps people to know about us, find the show, and we look for more good work from Tommy and Eddie from the Skit Guys. You can find them online as well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. What a privilege.
Yeah.